Hello, AusIOT. Welcome to another AusIOT. I am joined here by the amazing developer Steve tonight. Great working with you.
Hello. Always great to be on camera and on stage with you, Ali. But we have a new party. Well, I have a new party trick for our opening tonight. So I'm going to play some background music at the same time that we're talking. Yo. And it's actually really hard to do on a Mac. You want to go a bit louder? Hang on. And
I want to hear those party vibes because we have some awesome speakers joining us tonight. First, we should probably... I love this. Because it's music made by IoT, right? That's pretty much. Music made by code.
It's actually... Well, I'm actually the founder from what I'm using. It's called Sonic Pi, and it's actually an open source project out of the UK. We have an amazing UK speaker tonight, so thought I would mention it. But yeah, the person that made this software that I'm using also did some stuff at SneakCon recently. So some of the opening work, and I started playing with it and then routed all my audio around and did fancy things. So, highly recommend checking it out. It's actually a lot of fun. It literally. Coding music code, I guess you could call it.
I think the guy that made it as well was a musician or had managed musicians or something, or a producer, was he? And was also into coding. So we put this together to try and educate people on how to make music, which is a really cool little background story that I read up on. But before we get started as well, I really should begin by acknowledging the Bunurong Boon Wurrung peoples of the Eastern Kulin Nation, which are the traditional custodians of the land on which I'm here today in rainy Melbourne, and I hear it's raining most of Australia. So, and I want to pay my respects to the elders past and present, and I extend my that respect to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples here today and acknowledge their ongoing connection to land and water. So welcome to AusIOT. We've got an exciting panel tonight, as we've kind of already alluded to. Did you want to share the slides there, Steve? So welcome to anyone that hasn't used Remo before as well. So just a bit of background in case you haven't used Remo. We're currently in presenter mode. We are recording this. It will go up on our YouTube channel later, so you can go and check out our AusIOT YouTube channel for all our back talks from last year and this year as well. There's some amazing speakers on there. We had Arduino talk. We had Harold from Germany, called the godfather of IoT, is he? Have a chat with us as well. We've had some really cool startups. We've had some personal project talks. We've had one from Chris Briggs from BrisJS. So many great topics on there that you can check out as well. Thank you to our hosts as well, to IBM for providing this platform for us to use. To Telstra and Michelle for always supporting this event. And I noticed the other day I went to dev.telstra.com and there we were in a snapshot at one of our earlier meetups on the front page. So that was pretty awesome. And thank you to Sneak as well, developer Steve and Sneak. So we do have some news and cool stuff. I'm not sure, Steve, maybe we can do the news and cool stuff at the end if we're having some slide problems. That is back to front for us, I think.
Oh, I had it the right way around.
So we've got a mirror image there. So you did have it the right way.
I thought I was so clever doing that fix on the fly. I really did. And all right, there we go. Cool. Hey, that's all right.
Here we go. Nice.
I even got that LED to flash on that opening slide. So anyway, apologies to everyone. We are normally hardcore professionals, and our acknowledgement to country is I'd like to pay my respects to the Indigenous and communities in the lands in which I'm presenting from, which is the Wurundjeri people in country New South Wales. And I think you kind of covered some of this at the start.
I think we can probably get to the news and cool stuff.
Okay, cool. See, this is where I would play music, but I don't want to tempt any of my tech things because I am not having a good tech day, apparently. Anyway, so some of the stuff we've seen floating around the last few weeks since our last meetup in community things. You know, I bought a 3D printer a number of years ago now, and whenever I buy any new tech thing, I always look at it and go, what would I use that for? And of course, with a 3D printer, it's a bit of a reverse question because it ended up being, what wouldn't I use a 3D printer for? Which is kind of where this first article comes in. because I saw this and thought, yeah, there's no way I would use it for this. But anyway, cutting blades. You should not 3D print cutting blades and try to cut wood with them because, well, it's plastic anyway, for starters. But this article here on Hackaday was interesting because it kind of highlighted the point that you should not 3D print a cutting blade and try and cut wood with it. And there's a great video in there of this person trying to do that. And kudos to him for trying. Really, like, yeah, just I would not use 3D printer for this, but it was an interesting use case and, well, it doesn't work. One of the other things I just thought this was really, really cool is a cyber deck, some schematics for a cyber deck that appeared this week, which I kind of liked the print for, and it's kind of functional. It's very cyberpunky and kind of going through a bit of a cyberpunk thing at the moment. Hence my background, or yeah, the little tiny window, hence my tiny little window background. But what a cyber deck is basically it's a laptop computer, but using like a HMD or neural interface as a main output device. So it kind of bridges between a virtual world to, well, the real world, which, I mean, those lines in itself are getting a bit blurry these days. But anyway, that's a whole other discussion. But yeah, this one, I just thought this one was really cool. So this was basically mirroring some props out of a computer game or a cyberpunk series called Shadowrun. And yeah, they've got full blueprints and stuff on their site because it's all open source. And open source is amazing. Last thing I saw floating around, and I'm sure many of you that are 3D printing folks will kind of be familiar with, is Thingiverse, of course, did have a data breach. Yeah, there's no fixing this one because all their data was leaked. Anyway,
Did they steal the saw? Is that where that came from?
Oh, they might have. I didn't think of that. It's on there. No, things that were leaked, and like my stuff's in this too, as I'm sure many of yours are. The thing is, what I normally do with things like date of birth is I reverse my day and month around just to make sure. Well, I mean, Thingiverse didn't really need that, just to make sure that I was 18 or over 18 for maybe some questionable prints. Not that I go there, of course, but no one goes to those sections, of course. But yeah, normally with stuff like that, like I'll reverse my day and month around and then be like, oh, I didn't know. I thought it was American date time. So, but hopefully...
For anyone who has a day that's past number 12. But,
well, you can just minus 12 and then, yeah. Anyway. But yeah, hopefully you all didn't
never be able to get logged back in if we.
It's true. Well, this, yeah, I have actually been caught with that before as well. But anyway, things like emails and stuff have all been, well, they're part of the leak. So anyway, we're all in that boat. And of course, our good friend Troy Hunt actually weighed in on this one as well. And there was some interesting Twitter banter around it as well. But it just goes to show, like, on the security side of things, and I know we've talked about that previously as well. And, well, kind of what we're talking about tonight, not about data leaks, of course, but, well, how to secure your IoT devices and ecosystems to prevent from, or try and prevent this sort of thing from happening, is, like, this is why we put those security things in place, is to protect us, to protect our users and, well, just protect the ecosystem. Anyway, hopefully you all didn't get caught too much in that one. Discord. You're all going to join Discord. Ali, are you on Discord?
Already. I am on Discord. I have many Discords, but this is my favorite Discord because it's full of all our AusIOT community members. Actually, there's some really cool discussions about their projects and help each other with pain points or problems that are happening. So, yeah, there's some awesome folks in there, and encourage you to join if you haven't already.
I always love the agri-tech talks stuff. Yeah, and shout out to Craig Murphy posting. He posted a really cool article in there the other day, actually, on that stuff too. So, yeah, we're ready for the panel. Should we do the panel? Can we do the panel now, Ali?
I'm ready for the panel. I'm ready. I've been ready all my life for this panel. No, I'm actually really excited about this panel because we have some awesome guests with us, including, I don't know if you want to introduce them or will I, Steve? Well, including James Deacon is joining us tonight all the way from the UK. And maybe you can introduce him some more, Steve?
Yes, I have a whole slide.
That's what I thought, but it's not in my deck. Version control.
Version control. So this is something we've talked about a little bit before in some of our past meetups too. So this is the federal government. Well, actually, we've seen a number of governments sort of start to instigate more control and more regulation around IoT, not only IoT devices, but the tech industry as a whole. But of course, with IoT devices now, we're seeing the emergence of some pretty low-powered, very cheap devices. And I'm currently looking at a Wi-Fi light bulb, for example, that I may have about 30 of them. But a lot of that consumer-grade IoT stuff, for example, very, very cheap. You buy them in a 3-pack now. They're cheaper, actually cheaper than normal light bulbs, but there's no regulation around how they connect to your Wi-Fi, what information they're storing, how easily they can be accessed from outside your network, and how they can gain access to your network. So this has kind of been an ongoing discussion for some time now. And in Australia, the federal government last year instigated a voluntary scheme to try and protect more of the infrastructure and the firmware and the devices from that sort of stuff. Now, the next level of that is starting to look at how to instigate something like the ETSI standard, which we're going to find out more about tonight. From an IoT point of view, from all different points of view, from commercial, from consumer, and from the government legislation side of things in particular, but also just how it affects all different parts of the industry. Like, how does it slow things down? How does it stop innovation? Like, we're going to be looking at all that tonight. So that's kind of what the panel's for. I wanted to get some background first. So let's bring out our amazing speakers.
We definitely need a few standards around that, or at least looking into that. And we were just talking about hacks, and IoT are definitely prime attack vectors there. So
yeah, totally are. So let's bring up our speakers. Our first speaker on the panel we'll bring up is Wayne Law, who was a Telstra senior technology specialist, a bit of a guru, and has been around the industry for many, many years, particularly on cellular IoT. That's always one of my favorites. Cat M1 narrowband. Oh, I love that stuff. And yeah, Wayne has a load of industry experience. Has worked on many, many, many projects. So put your... Oh, you've already brought everyone on. I just switched back to the main screen. Amazing. The other speaker we're really lucky to be joined with tonight is James Deacon, all the way from the UK through the magic of video. And James is the head of international engagement and global standards for consumer IoT security at the Department for Digital Culture, Media and Sport, or also known as DCMS. And James came, very fortunate to have James here tonight. And he actually came because I reached out to ETSI and said, hey, would anyone be interested in speaking on a panel and, well, just helping us understand more how the nuances of the standards work. So welcome to you both.
Yeah, and thank you for joining us. We really appreciate it. And Steve, I'm going to hand over to you and let you take away the panel now.
Thank you. I am going to switch back to a non-presenty screen. There we go there. As we go along through tonight, for those in the chat, please drop your questions in the Q&A section or into the chat, and we'll work those into the conversation as well. Oh, seriously, tonight is cursed for tech things.
Did we just lose James? James, please feel free to keep your camera and microphone on unless we've lost you.
Wait, I have a scene just for this. I don't use this scene very often, but when I do... Anyway, all right, cool. Hello, welcome back, James. Wait, please tell me you're there. Yes, you're there.
Yeah,
James
I'm here.
Everyone's here. Let's get started.
All right, cool. So I am just gonna grab my notes. Essentially, I thought we'd throw to you first, James, to sort of get things kicked off because you're very familiar with the ETSI standards. But at a high level, what is ETSI, and like what are the standards that you've particularly like the top 3, I think, that you've implemented like in the UK? What do they look like? And definitely don't have to go into too much detail, just at a high level.
Yeah, of course. Thank you. And I'll try to keep it high level, but if I go way too far down the rabbit hole, just let me know, because I do live and breathe this stuff. So ETSI is it stands for the European Telecommunications Standards Institute. But that's a little bit misleading because the standards are actually globally applied. So Australia's published, the Australian government, that is, they've referenced ETSI in it. So it is sort of seen global adoption. But the standard that we're really interested in is called EN 303645, which is about consumer IoT, which is obviously a big interest for everyone here today. And yeah, so there's been the EN, which is sort of the core standard. And then off of that, we've produced other documents. So the most recent one was TS 103701, so that companies can actually assess how compliant they are with the standard. And in the UK, what we're doing is we've looked at the top 3 security requirements of that standard. So no default passwords on devices. You need to have a vulnerability disclosure program, and you need to be transparent. Security updates for, and those are what we're looking to bring into legislation as soon as possible.
Nice. Yeah, that was a really good explanation. Thank you. Wayne, have you you've obviously worked on like projects of all shapes and sizes over the years. How from a project delivery point of view, like how would you, I don't know if you're how familiar you are with the standards, but how would you see like standards like this contributing to, or I want to say delaying potentially. I mean, I've worked at projects before too. I kind of know how these things sometimes, they can slow things down a little bit. But I mean, how from a project delivery point of view, like how would you see this adding to or contributing to projects and project time, or like what's your thoughts on that? I think you're on mute. We are having some amazing tech facts.
Must be in the air, I swear.
Oh.
Where's those jokes when you need them, Steve? Surely you've got one. Did you get your IOT shirts printed yet? Or?
Oh, my IOT drinkable tea. I'm still waiting to do that. I keep raising it. Or my security.
Prove it. Your security, exactly. Still not hearing you. Maybe check your URL and just make allowing microphone up in your URL block. That's another common problem we find happens here.
I can't believe it. Like all year, we have like no tech fail at all, ever. Like ever.
I think we've had a couple, but not to this extent. We've definitely raised the bar for tech fails tonight.
Bring out my co-pilot and be able to fix stuff up.
But he doesn't talk either. It's like he's on mute. I think we are having a few issues there with Wayne.
You can't hear us?
Oh, there we go.
You can?
Yes.
I don't know what happened.
It worked.
Volume's a little low, but yet we can hear you. So
I just changed the microphone back and forth from headset to...
You know what I am? Yeah, Timothy, I also was actually going to blame a natural phenomena too, but it could be the rainy weather in Melbourne, or it could be the solar flare. There's an X1 solar flare. Anyway.
So get back to your question.
Yes.
Because I could hear you 100% the whole time. Most of my involvement with IoT security has been through the GSMA. The GSMA is, I guess, like an association of mobile operators around the world. And both myself and Telstra spent a lot of time working on the GSMA's IoT security guidelines. And in 2019, we both won awards at Mobile World Congress on that. So a lot of my work's been done on some of James's earlier stuff where the UK government had their code of practice already. And, the 303645 is pretty much identical to the code of practice to some extent. And James should probably talk more to that. And as James has said, Home Affairs code of practice here in Australia is similar to that. And also in Australia, you have the IoT Alliance of Australia. They also have similar principles and that sort of stuff as well. So it's actually a positive thing that all these different organisations all around the world all have similar ideas and similar views. It's not disparate views where people get confused. Somehow, and I don't know how, everyone seems to be singing from the same hymn sheet and all heading in the same direction, which is a really positive outcome for security.
Yeah. Where have you seen, have you had projects deployed, and James kind of touched on this too, and I was reading the vulnerability disclosure program from ETSI as well, which I love those programs because it gives the chance for vulnerabilities in the wild, if you will, to be safely disclosed and for research to be done in a safe and controlled way, if you will. But have you had projects before deploy where they do have a program in place, or has one's been added at a later date, or?
Yeah. So when devices come through certification, one of the questions we put forward to vendors is what security standards are they complying with? And some of the ones we just mentioned are on that list, and manufacturers have to, declare where they fit and what they've done and what they haven't done. From our own products, when we develop our own products, we have our own, Telstra has its own cybersecurity area, which we've had for many, many years. And internally, we need internal sign-off to make sure that, and just as James has said, those first, 3 points from the Australian Home Affairs point of view, that's also their first three, the three critical of the 13, first three are the most critical from the Australian perspective as well. So, some of it is a bit of a no-brainer. I mean, not having duplicated or default or weak passwords is straight up there. But I mean, that said, I've seen a number of IoT devices, and some years ago, we tested a number of different technologies. And one of the things we found, we purchased physical IoT devices from a range of vendors, and surprise, surprise, they all had the same hard-coded credentials in the actual, and they're all actually manufactured, well, allegedly from different vendors. Now, they might have all come out of the same factory offshore, but and this is the sort of stuff you look at and you go, well, guys, this is not security, it's a joke.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that is something, even in the last few years, like I've noticed more as a tech geek, but now you can buy these very low, and I was saying at the start too, you can buy these very low powered devices quite easily, straight off the shelf, no questions asked, ship it in from overseas, etc. James, have you seen, particularly in the UK, as the standards have come in, sort of the wider industry start to, well, on the consumer side and also the more bespoke project side, have you seen a wider adoption, sort of industry adopting the standards more, particularly to protect the consumer side of things?
So we're starting to see that happen now, but it has been relatively slow. So we published our code of practice in 2018, and there was a couple of companies who signed up for it, but by and large uptake was pretty low, and there wasn't that much enthusiasm for it, which is why we decided legislation was probably going to be necessary. I mean, that's changing a lot now, and it is fantastic to see work happening, obviously in Australia, but India, Germany, in the EU, in the UK, there is, as Wayne said, there is this sort of international agreement as to the sort of security requirements that we should be having in place for these devices. So we're starting to see that happening. And the great thing about a lot of the standards organizations is they do have industry partners involved as well. So it's not just about regulators talking to one another. It's also about actually making sure that manufacturers are in the room and can weigh in and make sure that we're balancing the need for security with also sort of what is practical for businesses.
Yeah, that makes sense. So one of the things that does come to mind, and like I've got probably about 80 devices at my house now because they're so easy to buy. But on the tinkerer side of things, on the maker side of things, how do these standards apply to that space in particular? Like, I bought a new coffee table the other year and put in 300 LEDs and hooked up to an ESP32, like, because, I mean, what else do you do with a big coffee table? It looks like an iPad. How, like, the next level, and, like, we've seen that through the industry before, and particularly through the maker spaces, like, the next level to that is everyone seeing it on social media, and then all of a sudden I'm mass producing. Like, what level do you think the standards should come in at for particularly, like, that whole innovation space? Oh, and this was aimed at either of you. Maybe both.
I mean, from my perspective, it should be, if you're a consumer, you need to buy a product that's fit for purpose. I mean, we've all read in, press reports about, the baby camera sort of thing, and all of a sudden some hacker from miles out starts talking to the baby. I mean, I mean, seriously, you don't want that sort of stuff going on. And there's hundreds of thousands of cameras out there. You can browse online where people have just got, default passwords, and it's there for everyone to see. I mean, so it's all right to have your coffee table where you do it yourself, you know it yourself, and it's your own decision. But if you buy a product, you expect it to be fit for purpose. And of course, in Australia, there's all sorts of consumer affairs laws around that as well.
Yeah, no, that is a good point. Actually, I had forgotten about that whole camera, the camera thing, which we've seen like the emergence of for a number of years now, including the whole connected, kids toy thing where it's open to the world pretty much. So that is a good point. Then, of course, one of my favorite, I'm going to say favorite, but one of my interest stories from last year was the whole the Cat M5 devices Cat M1 devices being hacked to download manga, which I don't even know why anyone would want to do that. But I think that's a good point, is like these standards are there to protect consumers and protect infrastructure, which is always, super, super important. And I think on the lower end side of things, it's always important to make sure, if you're building stuff yourself that, well, you know what it is anyway, and it's running on your network. So, but I think from industry-wise, like from the maker spaces, we always see very small-scale ideas kick off and produce massive production lines down the track. So, James, what are your thoughts on or how have you seen that side of the lower end sort of industry? I want to say lower end, but more the tinkerer side, the maker space side. Like, how have you seen the adoption on that level as they ramp up sort of small scale projects?
So it's not something that we've looked at in great detail, but I kind of agree with Wayne, which is, I think, is where it's you sort of creating this awesome coffee table. That sounds like a excellent project that it doesn't really need to be concerned about. It's when you start having that going to consumers, because it's something that sort of both of you touched on, which is it's so easy to get these devices. You can walk into loads of stores, pick them up, lots of reputable online sellers, you can get them as well. And it's just very dangerous to assume that consumers shouldn't need sort of a thorough knowledge of cybersecurity to be able to know which devices they can pick up, in the same way that you wouldn't buy a light bulb and hope it, with the expectation that it might burst into flames without warning. You shouldn't have to worry that the camera you're buying could be suddenly broadcasting to the internet without your knowledge. So I completely agree with both on that. But yeah, we've not seen it, but I think it's a really interesting point. But one of the documents we've just released is about allowing that self-assessment, because one of the things that we're really trying to do in the UK, which we're conscious of, is this is an incredible area of technology. Like, it can do so much good for people. So we don't want to be doing things that can stifle innovation. It's just about making sure that there is some basic security in place for consumers.
Yeah, that makes sense. And big fan of that approach, particularly being the tinkerer that will put 300 lights into a coffee table. How far, I guess, one of the things we've seen industry-wide over the years is just the emergence. I mean, IoT is everything. I remember doing stage demos back in 2014, putting Wi-Fi into a kettle and thinking it was, the hottest thing. Well, boiling water thing. Anyway, yeah, it was. And now, like, I can buy a $50 kettle which has Wi-Fi in it. But now, of course, we're seeing so much consumer industry-wide crossover. We're seeing, this stuff emerge into anything, including cars. Like, my car now has a SIM card in it. Does this standard apply to like vehicles, or is that a whole other standard in itself? Is that a whole other legislation? Like, where do you think the start and end point is as far as devices go? Maybe start with you, Wayne, if you want to answer.
Yeah. So I think in some ways you've sort of touched on a point which, if I think back to the Australian situation, I mean, one of the things we have here in Australia is what's called the Critical Infrastructure Act. And so if you're providing, devices for smart grid, for water, power, gas, and even the ports here in Australia, it's all considered critical infrastructure. And so the requirements for critical infrastructure take it to a whole new level. So we've been talking so far about consumer, and IoT protection, but getting into some of the critical infrastructure, because you imagine if, some, foreign actor of some sort decided to get into the power grid and start, turning off the lights on a whole suburb or a whole city, and it could be either through, direct into all the smart meters, or it could be either through some of the infrastructure. I mean, it's a whole new dynamic compared to looking at a baby camera, because then you're starting to have potentially life-threatening impacts and all sorts of stuff. So, I mean, in Australia, there's a whole set of much more rigorous requirements in terms of the actual owner of the infrastructure, the power companies and what they have to do. And there's also much more rigorous requirements on the likes of a Telstra or TPG Telecom or Optus or anyone who provides any carrier or any carriage service provider who provides infrastructure in support of critical infrastructure also has to get put through the ringer. And as a carrier, we have to submit blueprints of our network and the providers of the network, how we're doing maintenance, the people that are in place accessing those networks, the security arrangements we have, the vetting requirements we have in place. If we're doing offshore maintenance, if, say, for example, you choose to use an offshore partner, all that gets fed into Home Affairs and they go through that, and you have to there's a continual advisement arrangement where you have to continually advise them of any changes to your network. So you're right. I mean, there's different issues determining what you're dealing with. But from my personal perspective, I think that a vehicle, when getting back to the original question, I think a vehicle is really a consumer product. I know it's an expensive consumer product, but I still see it as a consumer product, and it should be no different. The idea of someone hacking into your car, whether it's the Tesla or whether it's a 1968 Mini or something like that, it's still it's your piece of your pride and joy. And you don't want in there, you don't want weak passwords. You want the software integrity to be maintained so that, least privilege and all those sort of concepts of getting in, and when you sell the car, for example, you want to purge all that data. You don't want, when the next buyer buys it, you want to be able to purge all that data out of your car so it comes out, clean as a whistle sort of thing. So when it's in the dealer's showroom for the next purchaser, they don't get to find out what, who you've had in the back seat, what you might have seen in the camera from the, and all that sort of stuff. It's all been purged, all that sort of, and these are some of the principles that are in, in 303645 and all these codes of practice.
No, I think that's actually that is something I had not thought about until you've just mentioned that. Yeah, and there's a lot of data now that these things are gathering, everything from like sensors around the car to 360 cameras and all sorts of fun and amazing screen things that I'm seeing pop up. The one thing actually that you kind of touched on there too is I saw we had Troy Hunt do an amazing talk at SneakCon not so long ago where he was talking about, I'm going to mention them because he did, but it was a Toyota in the US that used the VIN number, which is displayed in the front windscreen of the car, as part of the key to do the API call to do things on the car. So yeah, anyway, and being able to protect that sort of stuff, I'm big fan of. So. But
that gets on to another thing about securely storing the credentials. So effectively, these, and it's not just a case of dropping it into RAM or dropping it into, flash RAM or whatever. It's actually putting in a trusted platform module. For example, in the case of a cellular IoT device, you've got the SIM card there. And there's, all those secrets, today on, everyone on their mobile phone sort of thing has, the credentials to log onto the network. But there's a whole lot of work that GSMA has been doing around storing on that same critical element all your credentials, your certificates to authenticate yourself to your platform and that sort of stuff. And things like IoT Safe or generic bootstrap architecture and all that sort of stuff, different protocols that can be used to securely set up, end-to-end connections right across, right across through the network. And ensure that, because you need to be careful not to confuse familiarity with trust. I mean, devices can be familiar to the end server, but they may still not be trusted. And it's no different to people in an employment, internally. I mean, you might be familiar with people in your workplace, but that doesn't mean you can trust them. And I mean that nicely. I mean, you often hear stories of inside jobs and all this sort of stuff. It's the same thing with devices. The network might be familiar with the device. It doesn't mean it can be trusted, and you need to be careful not to confuse those two.
Yeah, No, that's a good point. Actually, James, I have a question, particularly around the standards and even the legislation that has been put in place to, I want to say enforce, but it's more enhance. Let's go with enhance. The standards. From the industry point of view, is there opportunity for people to be able to give feedback and even critique changes down the track for particular laws or particular standards that may go into place? Just, I think you can't, from what you were saying before too, you kind of recognize that the industry is going to change over time, and like that's, well, pretty rapidly as we see the tech industry. But yeah, do you see, is there a process for people to be able to give their 2 cents back into how things are shaping up?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's really a couple of different ways, I think, in which it's got to be a conversation, right, rather than just a top-down diktat. So the standards organizations are a great forum where that happens, because you do have industry as well as governments and consumer rights groups, for example. So you get all the different interests around the table and having those discussions. But also, on a slightly more practical note, for us in the UK, we're having to design this legislation very carefully so that we can continue to change it in the future, because we're aware that this is still just such a nascent area of technology. If you look at the number of devices that people had in their homes 3 years ago versus last year versus what they'll have in 3 years' time, there are going to be problems that arise in the future that we can't even start to think about now. So we're having to design the legislation in such a way that as the industry changes, as consumers become more mature, as just the baseline of security improves, as well as the standards and sort of international adoption off, we want to make sure that we can continue to adapt it so that it stays relevant and it stays useful. So that will involve conversations with industry, public consultations, and that sort of thing as we go through the development stage. And the standards are the same; they're living documents. So we've got 303.645, which is excellent, but it will continue to be adapted and reiterated, not in a hurry, but it needs to stay a relevant standard. So we'll be updating it in the future to make sure as well that it stays as useful as can be.
No, I love that. It almost sounds like an open source law approach, and I'm always a big fan of open source, as we all are. No, I love that. We do have a question from Timothy. Just before we go there, I'm going to welcome in a good friend to AusIOT, well, and also an amazing geeky tinkerer, person that does all sorts of fun little project things, or not little, but all sorts of IoT projects, Christopher Briggs, who joins us from Brisbane. Christopher, did you want to do a quick intro, Chris? Before, and then we'll go to the question in the chat.
Sure. G'day. Yeah, I'm the host of Brisbane IoT, coming to you from a time zone where we forgot that you guys have daylight savings.
Oh, it's fine. It's fine. We've had all sorts of fun tech fail tonight. I can't even begin to tell you what you've missed out on, but it's been fun.
Yeah, I as well as hosting the IoT user group here in Brisbane, I run a consultancy that's called Accelerando, where we do Internet of Things. Today I've been asked, for example, can we do something interesting with the fact that that a certain pest attract to a certain material that is I can't really speak about, but it's one of the more bizarre things I've ever had land on me. Where
I love your projects. I just love the projects you have come up, and there's been some ones in the past that we've chatted about. Yeah, I would go into.
Yeah, if you could imagine MythBusters only with more robots and less explosions most of the time. That's the kind of stuff that we do in our lab here in Brisbane.
Yeah, I was actually going to say there's less explosions. No, amazing. Always good to have you with us, and thanks for joining. So let's go to the question. We've had a question in the chat. If anyone has any other questions, please pop them into the general chat or into the Q&A section on the right-hand side. Timothy's asking, does the differentiation of tinkerer consumer greater than critical infrastructure make soft targets for escalation? I actually might need to bring Timothy up for that one. Does that make, did anyone want to answer that one?
Well, in terms of critical infrastructure, I mean, I guess probably the key thing that starts to differentiate between something that sort of turns up on Home Affairs radar and something that doesn't, there tends to be a magic number of about 100,000 endpoints. So if you've got some, you know, if you've got, you know, so say if you only got, you know, 10 smart meters in a small country town or something like that, it's not really going to turn up on Home Affairs radar. But if you've got, you know, the whole of Melbourne or the whole of Sydney with millions and millions of smart meters, then yes, that's definitely on their radar. I don't know if that answers the question.
Timothy joined us on stage. Did I ask that right, Tim?
Yeah, pretty much. I was just wondering about from a security standpoint, thinking about privilege escalation. If we've got more relaxed standards to encourage innovation for tinkerers and that sort of stuff, does that mean that, you know, they become soft targets for people like other things, or for consumer goods? If consumer goods like a car, for example, has a lesser standard than critical infrastructure like power, does that then mean that they become soft targets for people to compromise cars and extract a wealth of PII and movement and whatever other data that could be used to then compromise other things? Wondered if the level of standards or whatever varying creates some soft targets.
That's actually a good question, because I have scanned my car Wi-Fi. It has Wi-Fi, and there's 3 open ports that I don't know why they're there. So anyway, yes, that is a good question. Well, I know why that they're part of one of the apps, but anyway. No, that is a good question. Also, actually, just to add to that, we have seen, and NASA, I think it was last year, came out and said that they'd had their network compromised from a Raspberry Pi being plugged into an air conditioner unit from memory. It was some variation thereof, straight out of Mr. Robot. So yeah, if anyone has any thoughts around that sort of stuff, please, yeah, jump in.
I like to think of it in terms of what's the threat. Certainly, from the point of view of a nation state, from the point of view of usability to an attacker in terms of, say, creating a botnet of devices, obviously a large-scale consumer device is a more attractive target. But from the point of view of you as a person, there's one of you. To be frank, you have one set of genitals, and you don't want to see them on YouTube. So, if you're building an IoT device, that's your threat model as a consumer. Is, do I want my shower camera or my whatever looks out over my pool, or whatever controls my front door lock to be compromised? It doesn't matter whether whether what you're using there's one of it or 1,000 of it. If it's vulnerable, that's a risk to you personally. Obviously, from the point of view of infrastructure, they don't care if one person gets hacked, but you as one person certainly do. So yes, from one end, from the vulnerability to the society, whether you're a tinkerer or a mass market product makes a difference. But from the point of view as a user, certainly your level of risk doesn't particularly change, and that's what the moral issue, I think, for producers of IoT is to make sure that we're not putting people at risk of gross privacy or safety violations, whether we're building one device or a million.
No, that's a good point. Actually, Christopher, I'll loop back to a question we were talking about just at the start. Is how familiar are you just with the projects that I know you? The amazing I do actually secretly love some of the projects you are working on. But yeah, with some of the projects you have implemented, like worked on in the past, how familiar have you been with talking to clients with the security standards? And I think you kind of summed up part of this earlier with what you're saying about the points of vulnerability in the stuff you're building out. But how aware even are some of the clients you're working with the need to have those standards in place to protect everyone, including their infrastructure.
I've been pleasantly surprised with how sophisticated many of them are. So yeah, I often get the question of, could somebody take this over, or do we need to be worried about threat X, threat Y? At the moment we're working on one of our projects is an access control system. So that's obviously needs to be highly secure. I've been calling for the finest kind of standards and the kind of codes of practice that we're finally seeing for quite a while. So I'm absolutely thrilled to see some motion in that space. But in general, I would say the level of awareness of security and particularly reliability from adopters of IoT, shall we say, is pleasingly high. It tends to be, in my experience, the users and the potential buyers who are aware of how badly things could go wrong, whereas manufacturers and some authors are the ones that most need a wake-up call. I think, going back to the my genitals are on YouTube issue, the people whose genitals are on the line are fairly aware of the risk there. Every time I talk about having an IoT security system, people ask me, what happens if the power goes off? And that's something that is very, very important to me, is that something that does have a critical role, like access control or security, has to have the right kind of failure modes. That you're not trapped in a burning building because your IoT door lock is fail secure where it needs to be fail safe. So that's always something that I think about, and I'm generally pleased how well the users think about it. I'm not too thrilled, as you say, with the mystery telnet ports on devices. I've seen the same thing myself. I've got devices where I'm using them in my office because I bought a bunch of devices to try out for a potential buyer, and I said, well, I can't recommend this device to you because I don't know what the password is for that port 23 listener that I can't turn off.
Yeah, no, that one
that I can't sell.
I too have scanned many things that are like, what are you doing? I can see you doing something, but I don't know what you're doing, which is always concerning. Actually, that's a good point. And this may be one for James if he wants to talk to, which is there a mechanism with the current sort of standards in place and legislation in place in the UK? Is there a mechanism for consumers or somebody that's bought a thing that they're maybe a little bit suspicious about, like don't know what that port is doing, for example? I'm not going to report my car. But is there a way for concerns to be raised by consumerists for connected devices?
So there's really two ways that we're trying to tackle this here in the UK. So the first part is about consumer education. So the National Cybersecurity Centre have done a lot of public documents where they're kind of trying to encourage people to be sort of tech aware and to try to be able to interrogate a little bit what they're using. And things like changing passwords, for example, from the default setting is a really easy way of preventing sort of a lot of damage that can happen. But equally, that still puts a lot of burden on the consumer to actually, which isn't, it's just not a fair way of doing it, which is why we're going to be bringing in the legislation. And that will have, there's going to be an enforcement body that we will put in place who will be actually responsible for making sure that when they get reports of things, whether it's from consumers or security researchers or whoever it is who's identified this stuff, that they can look into it and make sure that they are actually adhering to all of the requirements they're meant to be.
Nice. And like I said before, I do love a good vulnerability disclosure program. Actually, Chris, have you ever implemented or submitted anything to a vulnerability disclosure program for any boards or projects or?
Let me think about that. I don't think so. No, I tend to get as far as a suspicion that something is not too secure. Like you see weird behavior with say password input fields that look like, you got a high suspicion that there is a shell script somewhere behind this inside a little embedded Linux system. And if I had the time, I'm quite sure that I usually get to the point where I am confident that a determined attacker could probably break this because all the signs are there, but I often don't have the time myself to go and put that in. And that's, I think, one of our risks is that the attackers potentially can be millions of bored kids, or you've got classes of attacker. If you've got a nation state that wants in, they are going to find the one vulnerability they need to get in. But if you've got a million bored teenagers, then you've also got quite a powerful attacker in aggregate. And from the point of view of choosing devices, I think the emerging standards are doing exactly the right thing, which is getting rid of the low-hanging fruit.
Yeah.
Where you've got, as I said, I've got devices that I've evaluated where I can see there's a telnet thing, there's even a login prompt, but there's nothing in the documentation about how to turn it off or what the password is. The manufacturer can't tell me. I've gone back to the creators of these devices and say, hey, look, I want to use your device. I want to put it into this project, but it's got this fairly obvious vulnerability that is a great concern, and they can't tell me how to fix it. It's like, the developer who wrote that's left, or we bought it from somebody else. So the first defense to a consumer is don't buy those devices. And that's usually where I stop on.
I've picked up, that just resonated because I've picked up projects before as a dev, and literally there'll be a comment in the code saying sorry in advance, and you're like, no, don't do that. So yeah, totally can resonate with that one. Actually, Wayne, I did have a question. I didn't have a question, but developer Ali asked a question, and I thought would love to get your thoughts around this too. Is have you seen anything like with a vulnerability disclosure program, any bounty programs that you've seen successful either through one of the networking companies? Maybe Telstra's got one that they run, and I'm a big fan of the Telstra SOC. I've worked closely with them as their evangelist in previously, and they do amazing work. But what are your thoughts on bug bounty programs with vulnerability disclosure, the sort of challenges programs?
I mean, I think it's a great idea. At a personal level, I'm not aware of whether Telstra's received bug reports from people or not. But I mean, the whole concept of having a means to manage vulnerabilities is basically the second principle on most of these security guidelines. So yeah, I mean, it's a great thing because I mean, there's huge attacks out there that are going on. I mean, here in Australia has what they call the Cyber Security Industry Advisory Committee, and Telstra is very fortunate in that our CEO Andy Penn is the chair of that, and they have humongous, because that's where all the cyber crime reports go. And over the last 12 months, there's been 67,500 cyber crime reports into that group. So it averages about one cyber crime report every 8 minutes. So it's it's out there. I mean, and so the idea of hardening, as Chris has said, having open ports, the idea of hardening up, some of your devices so that you don't have all these, you don't have more openings than a Broadway play sort of thing, because the loss is huge. It's billions. I think it was something like in the latest report from the Cybersecurity Centre, their 2021 report was something like $33 billion in self-reported losses. It's huge, and that's Aussie dollars. I mean, it's just horrendous. I mean, it's so, and they're, I mean, that's all sorts of crime, not just IoT. That's fraud, online shopping scams, online banking scams. I mean, just about every day on my phone, I get some text message from someone saying your package is ready to be picked up, and you go, "What package? I'm not expecting any package." And it's all that sort of stuff. And sometimes I mean, I still have a landline here at home, And I tend to call it the scam line, because that's the only calls I get on the landline nowadays. And it's, sometimes you'll be in the kitchen making a cup of tea, and it rings, and you think, yeah, I've got 5 minutes till the kettle boils, I'll entertain myself, and you answer it, and it's a scam, but, and they ring you up and say, look, we're on their way to arrest you. And you go, really? Well, what time are they going to get here? I was hoping to have a shower before they pick me up. It's this sort of, it's some, but people do, and sadly, some people actually fall for this sort of stuff. And as an industry, we have a duty, I think, personally, a duty of care to protect and look after the consumers and make sure that things are done so that, as people have said, James said about, but some people don't know to change the default password. We should set it up such that it comes so easily and so intuitively that people do that, and we protect people from themselves, because not everyone is going to have, I guess, the technology savvy that a lot of us here on this session have. You think about your grandma and and people who don't have that sort of capability. We owe it to them to protect them.
Totally agree. And in fact, every time I go over there, I am always fixing their printer. So anyway, we've all been there. But no, I think that's super important as well. Actually, something I still remember seeing in some of the early Wi-Fi routers was the old A1, B2, C3, D4, E5 password by default, which I always thought was insecure because no one changed it. And you could literally go around enable it and, you can connect to their internet if someone was so inclined. But yeah, I think you're right there. James, what have you seen in the UK as far as bug bounty programs, like successful bug bounty programs? And is there one attached to the ETSI standards for people to be able to, to incentivize bugs to be found? Well, not bugs, sorry, vulnerabilities.
So it's not something that I'm personally aware of. That's not to say they're not in place. It's just a lack of familiarity. But there is a lot of research that's being done at the moment that shows that vulnerability disclosure programs just there's just not being adopted widely by industry. So I know there's some really interesting research that's going to be published. I think it's tomorrow, which I'll happily send round to the group if it's of interest, which shows that the vast majority of manufacturers still, and I think this was focused on Europe and Asia, but they still don't have these programs in place. There's still no way of doing it. So I think bug bounties, if they're a way of incentivizing that, it feels like a good thing for manufacturers to be doing. But yeah, one of the requirements from ETSI, and we're going to be bringing in the UK and the legislation, is going to be around having these programs because, it's just such a low adoption rate at the moment, and it's just such an easy way of collecting really useful, valuable information.
No, I agree. Actually, one of the things I've been at a lot this year is capture the flag style events, which I'm a big fan of. It's always fun. It was actually I used Kali Linux for the first time this year. But yeah, from a vulnerability sort of approach point of view, like not understanding how a hacker thinks at a developer level has been handy, because I can use that to then, I can think like a hacker and know how to make sure they can't think like a hacker. Basically, if I can get around it, then they can get around it, so I make it so I can't get around it. But those capture the flag events, like I've been to a few of them recently, and interestingly, there was one really big one running out of Russia earlier in the year, where they got into a mock smart city. They had a whole diorama city set up, and they got into the city's core infrastructure through the airline, which I thought was interesting. And they walked through like how they did it, and it was mind blowing from a developer point of view. So anyway, we're going to, I think we're kind of out of, unless anyone's got any questions, looking at the chat, we're kind of getting close to time. So oh wait, hang on. I'm just reading a question out loud. Hang on. So Vince does have something, and I'm thinking about standards. Recently got a solar system installed. Oh, actually, this is a good one. Also looking at these recently in the connected things, which have multiple IoT devices built into inverter, power company device, and hot water unit. One is Wi-Fi, other is internet over phone. And the third is using RS485. The connection used has its own security issues. Have not tested these devices yet. So does standards cover different connection types? That is a very good question. Who wants to, maybe one for Wayne to start on?
Yeah, from my point of view, I mean, the standards are really guidelines. They're not prescriptive per se. I mean, it doesn't sit down and say on, on this type of interface, thou shalt do this. And so from my perspective, you should apply it across the board. It doesn't matter whether it's a serial interface, a Wi-Fi interface, physical interface, Ethernet or whatever, or, even if, in terms of a smart device, you have what they call the home area network, looking back down here in Australia, most of the smart meters are required to have Zigbee. I think it's 1.1 or something like that. It shouldn't matter. I think it should be, the principles should apply equally right across all the interfaces. And it's all about the concept of hardening your device. I mean, don't leave, let's face it, the Trojans knew back in the old days, knew how to get past the security sort of thing with the horse. I mean, don't just leave the back door open, have the front door bloody bolted hard and tight, and then people just walk around the back and come in the back way. I mean, you've got to lock all doors, and you've got to keep things secure. You can't just leave the window partly ajar for someone to just sneak in.
That is true. I love that analogy of the Trojan horse, because that is so apt.
It's absolutely true. I had a client today who was up a pole in Townsville. He makes devices for lighting, and they use RS485 Modbus, the protocol from the 1970s that's still around. But they've got a cellular bridge device in front of them, so it's a technology that had presumed that it was going to be used in a factory where there was a chain link fence around the outside and nobody was going to get near it. And now it's got a cellular gateway bolted onto it with essentially no change to the underlying protocol. So you're suddenly opening up something that was originally intended to be physically secure, and now it's on the internet with no awareness that it is. And that's a pattern that you see over and over again. You've got to people say, oh, the best security is an air gap. No, the worst security is an air gap, because there is never an air gap. Somebody always gets lazy or
complacent,
or needs remote access and takes a protocol that is notionally air gapped and bolts an internet gateway onto it. And you see the same thing with Bluetooth. Again, at our last at IoT Brisbane, we do a thing called Sunday Mad Science, which is basically an open lab day where bring your problem in, and we had somebody bring in a Bluetooth connected electroencephalogram, heart rate, and a monitor, and yeah, you run the app on your phone, you connect to the device. There's no password requested or anything. It's just the only thing that protects the data coming from that Bluetooth device is, I guess, security by obscurity. It's you can connect to the device and you can pull the information off, and if you know what it means, it's yours.
Yeah, I've seen actually floating around with the scales. That's right, those Wi-Fi scales, which I've never understood myself. Like, what? Anyway, a lot of those are open, and you can get floating around the internet maps of people using scales that are open to the world.
Yeah, I for one don't want to see my weight on YouTube either.
Same, right? No, I think that's amazing. I think unless anyone has any other questions coming up, James, did you have any sort of final thoughts?
Just on the topic we were just covering, it's so important you're covering all the different types of network connections. So for us, we've looked at network connectable more broadly, whether that's Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, etc., to try and to do that. But more broadly, I mean, no, I've really enjoyed being here. If people have questions that come to you tomorrow or in a week or anything like that you want to ask me, just please do feel free to reach out. It's always nice to speak to fellow IoT enthusiasts, and I certainly don't have the technical knowledge or insight that you guys do, but if there's anything, on a slightly broader level that I can offer help on, but please do reach out. It's always nice to be working with fellow like-minded people who are trying to make good devices safe for the world.
Amazing. Thank you. Actually, I do have a tricky one for you. No, I do have a tricky one, but I'm not going to aim it at you. Just you. So one thing I have actually played with as a tinkerer, IoT geek, I don't know what I am anymore, but is and I think I've probably brought it up a couple times with a couple of you, which is passive Wi-Fi. So you can 3D print. Still blows my mind. You can 3D print Wi-Fi devices that don't use any electronics or batteries to create a Wi-Fi signal, and they kind of work through kinetic motion. So they put out like a Wi-Fi spike. Would something like that be covered, do you think, by this standard, by the standards that we've been talking about? And I don't know that there's any right or wrong answer to this, because I don't even know whether they're IoT things. But essentially, these are like a little dial that you would turn, and it to conduct these plastic plates will sort of connect and create, through a dipole antenna, create a Wi-Fi spike. And you basically can detect that Wi-Fi spike and know that thing is happening. These things are weird, so I don't know what the answer is for this, but I'm curious. I don't know if anyone's got any thoughts on that, because it's kind of a weird one. Or any final thoughts? Wayne?
Well, certainly can't help you on the twisty dials. I mean, I wouldn't be too worried about the dials so much. I'd be worried about what it's connecting to. And I guess the key thing is we've talked a lot today about devices, but really it's the whole end-to-end ecosystem, and the storage of data. You know, you have all these devices, you go and you buy them, and where do they connect to? The cloud. And so, you know, the cloud is just another way of saying someone else's server. And so you really have to be conscious about, well, how robust is that inverted commas cloud? Is it, you know, it's because you hear lots of stories of, you know, people's passwords getting let out, and how robust, you know, it's all very well to have an extremely well-designed and robust end device, but if the platform it's connecting to is you know, more holes in it than a sieve sort of thing, then you're in just the same problem. And so it's right through the whole end-to-end, you know, layered security. I guess I could do a blatant plug, and, you know, you could certainly, from a commercial point of view, people are welcome to come and engage our Telstra Purple teams. We actually have security consultants who can come out and talk to big businesses, but that doesn't help the little guy sort of thing so much.
I tell you what, Telstra Labs was one of my favorite places to ever hang out. So many fun toys down there. No, thank you. We'll also drop a link or two in the chat, but folks can also reach out through socials and stuff for any of our speakers tonight. Plus, yeah, we'll have a networking thing at the end if people can hang around and want to chat some more. Christopher, any final thoughts, words?
Yeah, when you buy a toaster and it electrocutes you, you don't say, "Oh, gee, there should have been an electrocution bounty." It's security is a consumer safety issue, and that's where it needs to be addressed. It needs to be addressed with, you know, if somebody made a toaster which routinely electrocuted people, there would be consequences, and there's a fine line to be walked between shutting startups and hobbyists out of the markets by putting barriers in front of them, and, you know, basic protections. And I think that the kind of movement that we're seeing in the standard space is exactly that. It's basic consumer protections that are a mandatory standard, that a minimum standard that you ought to meet to be let into the sandpit. And I don't think it's even particularly onerous, and yeah, it's absolutely the right way to go.
Actually, that's it's a common theme amongst all of us. Is, I mean, we build these things for, you know, consumers in mind. We owe it to them to also protect them as much as we're building them in the best connected thing, or the best thing in general, just from a developer standpoint. And it's something I always love, you know, highlighting with devs, or even just reminding them and saying, hey, you know, you're building this experience for these users, like, to affect their daily lives. You need to protect their data and experience as well. So, which seems to be the common theme here too. So I love it. No, thank you all. Yeah, and thank you all for your time. I'm going to say tonight, but James, I also mean this morning. And Ali's got her slides working, because my tech fail is still real.
Just in case, Steve. Yeah, amazing. Thank you so much to our panelists. That was a really interesting discussion. I learned a few things as well. And yeah, it's always about consumer safety, and I don't want to plug something in and have my data stolen or my car driven off a cliff by someone, worst case. Good to see people doing some amazing work in this space as well. Thank you to everyone joining us as well.
Actually, I'm just going to add something there too and say, because one of the apps for my car with these 3 open ports that I still don't know why they're open, actually controls the seat as well. So also don't want someone changing my seat while I'm trying not to drive off the cliff.
Preferably, yes. or lighting it on fire or something. Just before we go, and again, amazing thank you to our panelists and to everyone for joining us tonight. Anyone on YouTube, if you want to reach out to us, if you want to hear more, if you need speaker details to get in touch with them, we'll have our socials up, or join our Discord and just ask directly there. Most people are there, so feel free to join that as well and talk amongst yourselves and between events. We have a few events coming up in this space, which is cool to see because there's plenty of innovation happening. So this is one that's come from Craig, I believe. Potentially, Craig, would you want to have a chat about this?
I think he might be making dinner, but if he wants to jump in, he can. But this is
talk about it. If not, all good.
Okay. The good people at the innovation space in Canberra have an open source hackathon day coming up, or a hackathon week coming up from the 22nd to the 26th of November. So it's all online, so you don't have to actually be in Canberra. But check it out on their website, get all the details and stuff. I always love hackathons. I mean, you just see some really interesting stuff appear at them. So worth looking. And speaking of hackathons, there is another hackathon going on, a Telstra hackathon even, Wayne. So this is one that last year, this is the one we were talking about, Steve. You and me joined this as part of an IBM team last year and came second. So they've extended the deadline to join this until the 7th of November. So get in quick if you do want to join this one. There's some cool themes as well. One of them smart stadiums, one of them smart logistics, and the other one is new experiences. So including gaming new experience, COVID safe experience, anything you could think of. Obviously, Telstra is big in the IoT and, Cat M1 and 5G and all APIs space, all the APIs, maybe not all of them, that's a bit much, but big in that space. So really cool themes and some good prices on offer there. I'll also be joining this again this year, so I'm looking forward to that one. So just have a look at the webpage there. I was just going to say, Ali, because I have fond memories of last year's effort, and I mean, hackathons are always stressful at any time, but what was your favorite memory from last year's hackathon effort?
I think it was building a whole app in about 24 hours that you gave me to build it, the prototype for this one. That was my... But, pressure makes diamonds, Steve, and I'm always up for a challenge like that. I'm like, let's do it. I can have a crack at that.
I still remember trying to get scrolling elements, map elements inside a React Native app that just was not kind of maybe built. But I mean, it looked fine. It was fine.
It's a chance. That's the point, isn't it? Part of it is about learning new skills. Part of it is about just like some of the cool ideas that you see out there and meeting other cool people that are involved in this. And part of it's just not sleeping.
This is true.
And we've added a hackathon as well, so you never know where it might take you. I love them. What else is coming up? The Australian Internet Governance Forum. Maybe you can talk about this one. We've got a very own awesome Michelle Howie talking as a panelist on this one, and I think you know more about this than me, Steve.
No, I don't. But anyway, Michelle sent this one through. There's totally worth checking out. There's other good friend, Alexa, who's done a whole bunch of amazing community work throughout the years and will be representing the Linux Users of Victoria group. But he's been around so many different community groups. And of course, Ellie from RMIT, who does, a whole bunch of really cool student-led initiative things. So, this one, super interesting. Check out the link on the page. Links on there. And also shout out to Michelle when you're there.
100%. Doing an awesome job.
Say hi.
And what I love seeing these days as well is there's so many environment and sustainability initiatives coming out in the tech space, which is great because our government's doing nothing about it. Did I say that out loud? Anyway.
You did. No, not at all.
no next event coming up is actually December. I'm sorry, I don't know why that's because we're already in November, so we'll probably keep an eye out for our December one. We're likely going to do something around holiday projects, so just a little bit of fun. If anyone has a project they do want to share for that, or that can give, all good, Craig, that can give, that can give a little talk on something people should build, or where to find resources for something to build over that holiday period when we've maybe got a little bit of extra spare time, let us know, and keep an eye out for that one. And I think that's it. That's all, folks. So they say.
We made it and my computer didn't catch fire.
So we will stop talking and let everyone get back to the tables. Please feel free to hit up our awesome panelists tonight and talk some more with them if you have further questions, or get to know them some more, or geek out with us. Thank you for joining us here at AusIOT, and join the Discord for more conversations. Oh, outro music.
Outro music.
Getting really fancy these days, I see. All right, take care. Talk to you soon. Thanks, everyone.